I never thought when I saw Simone's Instagram photo captioned, "The Family That Matters," featuring her, my son Marcus, and her mother Veronica at their beach house in Hilton Head, I posted 2 words, "Good luck." And exactly 60 minutes later, Marcus came barreling into my living room on Auburn Avenue, pale and shaking, yelling, "Mom, the lawyer just called. What did you do?" He didn't knock. He pushed straight through the screen door like he owned the place. Like the hardwood under his feet hadn't been mopped and polished by the same hands he now refused to hold in public. I paused the coffee grinder and looked at him without blinking. I didn't ask him to sit. I didn't offer water. He stood there, breath tight, pupils jumping, the kind of scared a man gets when he realizes the lie he was sitting on just grew teeth. "What lawyer?" I asked, turning back to the counter. "Calvin Banks called my phone this morning." "You want a cup?" He ignored the question. "Mom, they said there's a formal request for will re-examination. Simone's freaking out. Her mother's threatening to file harassment charges." "What the hell did you say online?" I handed him a cup anyway. "Black, no sugar, let him sweat." I said, "Good luck. That's all," I replied. "Under your wife's picture, the one where she wrote, 'The Family That Matters.'" Marcus stared at me, blinking too fast. "She didn't mean it that way," he mumbled. I walked into the dining room, opened the drawer where I kept my tax receipts and Lionel's military discharge papers, and pulled out a small folder marked with a yellow sticker, "Deed, 2002 Final." Then why was my name removed from this deed? I laid the folder on the table like a hand in poker. And why did the county records office just confirm someone submitted a corrective transfer behind my back? He didn't answer. "Marcus," I said, lowering my voice, "this isn't about feelings, it's about law. And since your wife and her mother wanted to treat me like a ghost, I took action like one." At 9:02 a.m. that morning, Calvin Banks had confirmed receipt of my formal fraud inquiry, attached to an affidavit requesting emergency injunction on all property transfers involving 1473 Henderson Ridge. Marcus set down the untouched coffee. Then he walked out without a word. 2 months earlier, on August 3rd, I overheard Simone whispering to her mother that I'd never survive probate court. And that's when I decided to stop pretending I didn't know they were trying to erase me. It happened at Veronica's retirement party. She insisted on hosting it at that overpriced wine bar in Midtown. Rosé on tap, candles in broad daylight, shrimp cocktails nobody touched after the second hour. Marcus made me go. "Be civil, Ma," he'd said, like civility had ever saved a woman from being gutted clean by a smile. I stood by the wall near the restroom alcove, waiting for my ride-share home. Simone didn't see me. She leaned into her mother like they were plotting a coup, low-voiced and giddy, the kind of glee that doesn't come from jokes but from power. "She doesn't have the energy for probate," Simone said, swiping through something on her phone. "One hearing, and she'll fold. Trust me, I've seen her checkbook. She's got, maybe 2 months? Cushion? Tops." Veronica nodded slowly, lips pressed in that smug little purse she'd perfected. "Then we move ahead with the paperwork. She'll yell, maybe. But there's nothing to yell about once it's filed." I didn't move, didn't flinch, just listened, my back to the textured wall, hands clasped so tight my nails left half-moons in my palms. That's when I realized they weren't trying to get over on me. They were planning my burial. Paperwork first, mourning optional. I said nothing to Marcus that night. I didn't call Calvin. I didn't even cry. I went home, opened my fireproof box, and took out every document Lionel had ever signed. His original 2002 will, our joint mortgage agreement, my power of attorney over his estate. I read every line until the sun came up, looking for cracks they might exploit. But Calvin had done the work clean back then. Lionel's wishes were solid. If someone was rewriting them now, they were doing it with malice and nerve. That night, I stopped being polite. I started recording calls, saving texts. I called Bank of America and updated the alert settings on my accounts. I ordered duplicate title copies for my vehicle and my house. I backed up every folder, twice, because I had survived worse than probate. And this time, I'd survive it with proof. After years of being left out of birthdays, having my texts ignored, and being called extra behind my back, the final straw came when Marcus canceled our annual mother-son brunch and said, "Simone thinks it's time we create new traditions." He said it like it was thoughtful, like I should be proud to be replaced. I'd already made the reservation at Mary Mac's, same table near the window, same time we always chose, one day after his birthday. I'd bought him a card, handwritten as always. Nothing dramatic, just a memory about the year he turned 10 and asked me to let him pour the syrup by himself. That boy had cried when he spilled it, like he'd broken the world. Now here he was, 37, calmly telling me there was no seat for me at my own tradition. I stayed on the line, let the silence stretch. He filled it with excuses. Simone's been wanting more time with her mom. You know, just us. Veronica's got that acid reflux and can't really travel anymore, so we're thinking of just doing something quiet at their place this year. Their place. Not his, not ours, hers. I asked if I could drop by later that week, just to see him. He hesitated. Let me check with Simone. There it was. When he hung up, I sat at my dining table, staring at the folded napkins I'd set out for brunch. Cloth, not paper. Pressed. I don't do things halfway. But I hadn't realized I was the only one still preparing for a relationship they'd long since put on pause. That night, I found a Facebook comment from one of Simone's cousins, some photo from last year's birthday, captioned, "Look at this queen, keeping Marcus classy despite the chaos." I knew who the chaos was. I was the only thing ever considered excessive in that marriage. Not her mother's arrogance, not the way they rewrote history, just me. So I logged off. I put away the card. I lit a candle and wrote a full inventory of everything I still had legal authority over. Tradition wouldn't save me, but documentation might. By late August, I noticed all my calls to the property tax office and HOA were being rerouted, and when I checked the deed, I saw someone had quietly submitted a corrective transfer on my late husband's house, my house, listing Marcus and Simone as joint owners. It started with a voicemail from the tax office, a clipped message saying, "My inquiry must go through the authorized parties on record." I called back, thinking it was a mix-up. The woman on the line repeated the same line, this time with a tone that made it clear she'd been coached. I asked who those authorized parties were. She hesitated, put me on hold for 4 minutes, then came back and rattled off Marcus's name, followed by Simone's, her voice faltering like she wasn't used to saying it out loud yet. That was the first time I felt my chest burn. I drove to the recorder's office myself, parked in the visitor lot, walked in wearing my navy blue slacks and Lionel's old VA jacket-like armor. The clerk behind the plexiglass greeted me by name, Ems. "Monroe, you still look sharp." And I smiled, but not too much. I asked for the most recent deed record on 1473 Henderson Ridge, and when she printed it, I saw the words "corrective transfer" typed in bold at the top, dated July 19th, filed electronically. The names underneath it told the story. Marcus D. Monroe and Simone A. Monroe listed as joint tenants with survivorship rights. Mine wasn't there. No notice. No signature from me. No certified mailing. Just gone. I asked to see the original transfer filing, and the clerk showed me a digital scan on her screen, a blurry PDF, stamped and uploaded. My husband's name typed out in block print, and in place of my signature, a scrawled mark that looked nothing like mine. This was submitted remotely, she explained, through the self-service portal. It's a common update after a death in the family. My husband died in 2020. That transfer was filed in 2025. I thanked her, kept my face calm, and asked for a certified copy. She handed it over with a receipt. I folded it slowly, placed it into my folder labeled Disputes, and walked out without looking back. They thought I wouldn't check. They thought wrong. I called Calvin Banks, the estate attorney who handled Lionel's probate in 2002, and within an hour he confirmed that someone had submitted a forged amendment to the will dated March 2023, 3 years after Lionel's death. Calvin answered on the second ring, same gravel in his voice, Same slow drawl that had once talked a probate judge into reversing a ruling without raising the pitch of his tone. He still remembered Lionel's case number, said he'd always liked working with that no-nonsense couple who didn't flinch at fine print. I told him someone had rewritten that fine print without me. He went quiet for a long few seconds, then asked me to email every document I had: original will, death certificate, marriage license, property record. I scanned and sent them within 20 minutes, each file renamed with the date, clean as evidence should be. At 2:47 p.m., he called back. "Delilah," he said, "someone filed what's called a testamentary amendment, supposedly executed by Lionel in March of last year. It names Marcus as successor executor and converts the Henderson Ridge property into joint inheritance. But here's the problem. Your husband's date of death is still listed as March 2020, and the notary seal on this amendment doesn't exist in the Georgia database." I took a deep breath and asked for the copy. He sent it over immediately. When I opened it, the signature jumped out at me first. Lionel's name, spelled wrong, Lionel. A capital E that cut through the middle of the O like a drunk man's flourish. The writing was stilted, hesitant. Lionel had signed documents with precision. His hand was steady until the end. This was an imitation, not even a good one. Calvin's email included the docket number, case ref 23-9415P. He said he'd already requested a freeze on any legal activity tied to that filing until we could present proof of fraud. He wanted me in his office the next morning at 10 to sign an affidavit verifying my non-involvement. I printed every page, highlighted the signature, and stapled it to the back of the forged amendment. My late husband's name had been turned into a weapon. Now I was ready to return fire, with documentation and timestamps. Calvin showed me a grainy PDF scanned into the court system. A fake signature with Lionel's name misspelled Lionel, witnessed by two people I'd never heard of, one of whom died in 2021. His office hadn't changed in 20 years. Same cracked leather chairs, same glass candy jar with peppermints and a few lonely butterscotches. He slid the printed amendment across the table without commentary, just watched me read. The paper was thin, courthouse quality, smudged at the edges. The notary block had been filled out in blue ink, but the signatures looked photocopied, and Lionel's was glaringly off. The N sloped down like it was written by someone unfamiliar with cursive. Worse still, the two listed witnesses had names I didn't recognize at all: Ronald P. Gates and Marie T. Lasker. "Ronald Gates died in April 2021, Calvin said, tapping his pen on the page. "Stroke, public obituary, registered voter, DMV record. Dead 2 years before this document claims he watched Lionel sign it." "And the other?" I asked, already bracing. "Marie Lasker's a mystery. No license, no property, no court record. Could be real, could be made up. But her address on this document doesn't exist. It's a condemned building that's been boarded up since 2019. I stared at the sheet, felt my fingers tighten. Lionel hated fraud. He used to audit military grants for falsified receipts. He once reported his own cousin for claiming overtime she didn't earn. Now here was his name, carved into a lie, notarized by ghosts. "I've seen enough," I said. Calvin nodded. "We'll need a sworn affidavit from you stating you had no knowledge or consent regarding this amendment, and confirming the original 2002 will is valid and uncontested until now. I'll prepare it by this afternoon." I signed the visitor log on my way out, took a copy of the forged amendment, and added it to my red folder marked Active Disputes. As I stepped into the hallway, my phone buzzed. An email from the recorder's office confirming that a second property transfer had been requested but delayed for verification. They weren't just trying to steal history, they were trying to erase my husband's signature from it. They were going to need better witnesses. I pulled out my old financial archives, accessed Lionel's notarized 2002 will from my safety deposit box at the Bank of America on Edgewood, and digitally compared the signatures using DocuProof software, zero match, full forgery. The will was where it had always been, wrapped in a cream envelope marked Final Copy, Witnessed. I signed into the safe deposit vault, just after opening hours, the clerk still finishing her coffee. She walked me to box 71B, asked if I needed a private room, and I nodded. Inside the little booth, I laid everything out with the same deliberate precision I used during audits. Original will, Lionel's power of attorney forms, notarized health directive, and 3 signature cards from our joint account. He signed his name the same way every time. Deliberate L, wide O, clean finish. I took photos under bright light, scanned them into my laptop, and uploaded them to DocuProof, the forensic signature comparison software I'd used for years before retirement. I almost didn't need to. My own eyes told me what I already knew, but the software confirmed it with brutal clarity. 0% match, stroke sequence inconsistency, line pressure mismatch, authorship, unlikely. It didn't just fail to match, it contradicted itself. Whoever forged it didn't understand Lionel's rhythm. His real signature moved with confidence. This one stopped and stuttered, as if copied one letter at a time. Whoever did it had likely practiced on a legal pad, maybe even traced from an old document. But they hadn't practiced enough. I emailed the side-by-side comparison to Kelvin, labeled the file Signature Mismatch A1, and saved 3 backup copies, 2 to encrypted USBs, 1 to cloud storage. I wasn't just building a case, I was making it airtight. On the way home, I stopped at the UPS store and printed hard copies with timestamps. I paid extra for a certified print log, just in case Simone tried to claim digital editing. I'd seen people weasel out of clearer crimes with less documentation. By the time I got home, there was a fresh comment on Simone's Instagram. Someone had posted, "Such a tight-knit legacy family." I stared at it, then took a screenshot. She wasn't just celebrating the theft, she was performing it. Let her keep performing. I had the receipts. When I confronted Marcus gently at his condo in Buckhead on September 2nd, he stammered, claimed Simone, handled the paperwork, and said, "Maybe you just forgot signing something, Mom," as if I had early dementia. I didn't go there unannounced. I called ahead, used the same calm voice I used when he was a teenager hiding report cards, told him I had some estate papers that needed clarity, and asked if we could sit down. He agreed too quickly, and that told me everything. When I pulled up to the glass and steel complex with the valet and the orchid arrangement in the lobby, I reminded myself that he hadn't always been this way. There was still a boy in there somewhere who used to beg for bedtime stories and asked to stir pancake batter. Marcus opened the door holding his phone, barely making eye contact. He said Simone was out running errands, but I didn't believe it. There was a purse by the couch and a mug with fresh lipstick on the rim. I sat anyway. I opened my binder slowly, placed a highlighted copy of the forged amendment on the coffee table, and said, "I just need to know if you've seen this before." His reaction was a tell. Eyes darted, fingers tensed, voice too fast. "Simone handles that kind of stuff. I think we filed something after we met with the estate planner, but I assumed it was just a name correction or something. You sure you didn't approve it? Maybe you forgot." I leaned forward, met his eyes. Lionel died in 2020. This document is dated 2023. Witnessed by a man who died in 2021. You think I forgot the laws of time? He looked down, rubbed his neck like the conversation physically pained him. "I don't know, Mom. You've been under a lot of stress lately." "You sure you haven't?" "No," I said. "Don't finish that sentence." I gathered my papers, but not in anger. Just enough finality to signal the shift. I told him I had no plans to fight with him, but I would fight for what was mine. Then I walked out, past the concierge, past the silent elevator, past the shallow shine of a life I helped build and was now being written out of. Let Simone handle the paperwork. I'd handle the law. Over the next week, I quietly collected 3 damning pieces of evidence. The HOA's transfer denial email dated July 5th, Simone's Slack messages bragging to her friend about sealing the deal on the deed, and a Venmo payment from Marcus to someone labeled Notary Dude Wine. I didn't need to shout or threaten. People talk freely when they think you've already lost. The HOA email was easy. I'd filed a routine request in June for approval to repaint the shutters navy blue, like Lionel liked them. When I never got a response, I followed up and received a reply from a woman named Leslie. Unfortunately, we cannot process homeowner requests unless submitted by the current title holders. Please have Marcus or Simone Monroe contact us directly. She attached a scan denial dated July 5th. That date mattered. The forged transfer had only just been filed, meaning they were acting on fraudulent ownership before the ink even dried. Next came the Slack messages. Yolanda's niece worked part-time in Simone's firm. Same building, same internal network. When I asked Yolanda if she'd heard anything, she didn't hesitate. A few days later, I had screenshots forwarded to me. Simone laughing with a colleague in a private channel, saying, "She's got no idea we sealed the deal on the deed last month." Veronica said if we kept it quiet, the old will wouldn't even matter. No concern, no caution. Just entitlement typed in lowercase letters like theft was casual. But the final nail was pure arrogance. Marcus's public Venmo feed was still unlocked. He never changed the settings. I scrolled back through the last 3 months and found it. A $600 payment to someone named Ray J. Notary, with a wine glass emoji and the words "Notary Dude Wine," dated June 29th, just before the corrective deed was filed. The timing was surgical. The emoji was mockery. I downloaded everything, saved the Slack screenshots with metadata intact, printed the HOA email and filed it with a receipt, captured the Venmo transaction, and recorded a screen video for backup. They were too proud to cover their tracks. They thought they were smarter than the system. But pride leaves fingerprints, and I was finally done wiping off other people's prints from my life. Calvin called me at 10:17 a.m. on September 15th to say he'd discovered a secret bank account opened in my name, routing my insurance settlement checks, over $68,000, into an account controlled by S. Monroe trustee. I was cataloging my documents by transaction type, legal, financial, digital, when the phone rang. Calvin didn't waste time with pleasantries. His voice was clipped, urgent. "Delilah, did you authorize a trust account ending in 4928 at Hamilton Southern Bank?" I told him I'd never even heard of that bank. He sighed, like he'd hoped he was wrong. "It was opened in April, under your full name, using your social security number. But the trustee listed is Simone." I sat down at the dining table, one hand flat on the folder I'd just labeled Insurance, Lionel Final Distribution. That money was from a supplemental life policy Lionel had taken out 6 months before his surgery, something he set up in private, just in case, knowing me well enough to plan ahead. The last disbursement had been mailed in April. Now I understood why I never received confirmation of deposit. Calvin had already pulled the transfer logs. 3 checks, totaling $68,391, had been endorsed digitally into the fraudulent account. The routing instructions matched Simone's known activity from a prior court case Calvin had handled. Different family, same playbook. She used your name and SSN to open the account, but she couldn't have done it alone, he added. Someone had to verify your identity. We're digging into access logs and branch surveillance, but for now I've placed a temporary fraud lock. The funds can't be moved or withdrawn. I didn't cry. I'd cried the day Lionel's policy letter came in the mail, with his initials neatly typed at the bottom. I'd cried when I sat in the car outside the insurance office, clutching the check like a message from beyond. But this? This was theft, pure and deliberate. I didn't mourn theft. I prosecuted it. I wrote down the account number, printed the fraud lock receipt, and highlighted the date, April 11th. The same day Marcus and Simone had posted photos from a financial wellness seminar in Charleston, smiling, grinning, teaching others how to plan for the future. Meanwhile, they were draining mine behind my back. On September 21st, I returned from church to find my mailbox smashed and a notice taped to my door. Eviction hearing set, tenant dispute over rightful ownership, and I realized they weren't just stealing, they were exiling me. The morning had started gently, full of gospel and warmth. Pastor Tate preached on the parable of the wheat and the weeds, how sometimes the wicked grow right next to the righteous, and you don't pull them up too soon, because you risk tearing out the good with the bad. I didn't know then how literal her words would land by afternoon. I came home, still holding my Bible, purse slung over one shoulder, humming part of a hymn under my breath. Then I saw the mailbox, bent inward like someone had kicked it with a steel toe, paint scraped clean off the edges, and the door barely hanging. Taped above the knob was a yellow half sheet with black block letters. Notice of hearing, landlord-tenant dispute. Case number, courtroom address, date and time, October 3rd, 8:30 a.m. The petitioner was listed as Simone Monroe, trustee of Henderson Family Property Trust. Trustee. They were trying to evict me from the house I'd paid off, repaired, and buried my husband from. They'd filed a civil complaint classifying me as a tenant in default, a legal workaround that skipped probate entirely by pretending I was a squatter. They weren't fighting me in open court. They were writing me out through county housing codes, using my own son's silence as fuel. I stood there, still in my church clothes, fingers clenched tight around that notice. Not shaking, just calculating. I went inside, sat at the kitchen table, opened a fresh file folder, and wrote across the top in red ink, eviction tactics. I took pictures of the mailbox damage, recorded a short video describing the condition of the notice and its placement, then emailed it all to Calvin with the subject line, "Escalation confirmed, physical evidence attached." They wanted to humiliate me. They wanted me out before I could speak. But now the clock was ticking. For them, the hearing gave me 12 days. 12 days to turn evidence into leverage. I spent 2 nights sleeping at my friend Yolanda's place, sick with betrayal, but by that Friday, I opened my laptop, reviewed my original living trust, and started documenting every timeline, every file, every false move, with color-coded receipts. Yolanda didn't ask questions when I showed up with an overnight bag and a stack of folders. She just pulled out the extra set of sheets and made me tea while I sat silently at her kitchen counter. I didn't cry there either. The tears had dried up by the time I'd read Simone's name on that eviction notice. What replaced them was a stillness, focus like I hadn't felt since the compliance audits at Bessemer National, back when I used to catch 7-figure fraud with nothing more than a spreadsheet and a deadline. Her guest room was dim and quiet, no framed affirmations or scented candles. Just a twin bed, a reading lamp, and a fold-out desk that became my war table. By Friday morning, I had my laptop open, Lionel's Living Trust pulled from my encrypted drive, and a new digital folder titled Counterclaim Prep, October. Each file I created had its own colored tab. Green for verified legal documents, blue for communications, yellow for digital transactions, red for known forgeries. I reconstructed everything by date. The July 5th HOA denial went under pre-filing conduct. The Venmo receipt to notary dude landed in the fraud execution section. Simone's Slack messages were printed, then annotated with context and confirmation timestamps pulled from metadata. I ordered a background check on Ray J. Notary, real name, Raymond Jarvis, suspended license in 2 states, and forwarded that directly to Calvin. It wasn't enough to prove intent. I had to show a pattern. I logged every interaction, starting with the first unexplained mail reroute and ending with the forged will's filing date. For each, I added a link to the corresponding document or image. By noon, I'd drafted a 16-page summary timeline, complete with embedded exhibits. Simone wanted me removed like a stain. Veronica probably thought I'd fumble the paperwork or miss a deadline. But I had time, I had records, and I had no one left to protect, which meant I had nothing left to lose. On October 7th, I requested a formal will review and title hearing through Calvin's office, making sure all parties were legally summoned for October 18th, 10:00 a.m. at the law firm conference room downtown. The filing went in at 9:16 a.m. sharp, just after I'd notarized my sworn affidavit at the DeKalb County Clerk's office. The clerk, a woman named Darnisha with sharp nails and a sharper mind, reviewed the documents twice before issuing the hearing request. She stamped each copy with deliberate pressure, like she understood what it meant for a woman like me to finally step out of the shadows with full documentation. I left with 5 certified sets, each one neatly sealed and initialed, and walked directly across the street to Calvin's building, where we filed the notice of dispute and formal challenge to the amended will. This wasn't just a legal hearing. It was a line in the sand. Calvin had secured the conference room, floor-to-ceiling windows, frosted glass door, long oak table meant to intimidate. We scheduled the hearing under state statute section 53451, the clause for suspected tampering or misrepresentation in testamentary documents. The language mattered. It said, "We're not debating feelings, we're confronting fraud." By noon, registered mail went out to Marcus, Simone, and Veronica. 3 separate envelopes, return receipt requested. I watched the tracking numbers upload in real time. A courier was also dispatched for direct service to their home in Sandy Springs. Calvin insisted on layered delivery. "They'll claim confusion or ignorance," he said. "We'll show the court we made every effort to inform them." I added the appointment to my own calendar with the subject line, Restoration, Legal Day 1. The next morning, I mailed a notice of my intent to contest the eviction as well, attaching evidence of ownership, banking fraud, and the will comparison analysis. It was sent directly to the magistrate overseeing landlord-tenant cases. That gave me procedural standing, just enough to stall any default ruling while we forced everything into proper court channels. Let them show up smug. Let them show up in pearls and pressed collars. On October 18th, I wouldn't be coming as a mother. I'd be coming as the sole legal heir. And I would have the law at my side. We sat across from each other under fluorescent lights, Marcus sweating in a too-tight blazer, Simone stone-faced in Chanel, and Veronica flipping through a notebook, while Pastor Geraldine from St. Agnes sat beside me, hand on her Bible. The air was stiff with unspoken tension, the kind that clings to formal rooms and shared bloodlines. Calvin opened with the basics: names, roles, date of the original will, and the statute under which the hearing was called. Simone didn't look at me once. She kept her eyes fixed on the table, like acknowledgement might trigger guilt. Veronica, on the other hand, was all performance. She flipped pages in her notebook with exaggerated care, crossed and uncrossed her legs, nodded along like she was a legal scholar instead of a well-dressed parasite. Marcus avoided everyone's gaze. He kept tugging at his collar, wiping his hands on his pants, clearing his throat at nothing. I could tell the weight of it had started to register, but not in the way that makes someone confess. He looked like a man caught in a net. He agreed to help weave, but never thought he'd wear. Pastor Geraldine sat beside me like a silent ledger. She wore a simple suit, soft lavender, and kept one hand steady on her closed Bible. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence made it clear this wasn't just legal, it was moral. And I was done being the only one in the room who knew the difference. Calvin outlined the structure of the presentation. "This hearing will follow a segmented review," he said. "Each claim supported by evidence, each allegation backed by records. The opposing parties may respond after each segment, but interruptions will not be tolerated." He looked directly at Simone when he said it. She blinked once. That was the most movement she gave. I kept my folder closed for now. Let the evidence do the talking. Let Calvin walk them through their own missteps, mistake by mistake, page by page. I wasn't here to shout. I was here to restore what had been taken. They thought showing up polished would shift the balance. But you can't accessorize your way out of fraud. And no designer label in the world would protect them from what came next. Calvin presented the evidence in phases: the mismatched will signatures, the deceased, quote, witness, the forged trust documents, the digital trail of money transfers, and finally the notarized affidavit I'd secured from the real title holder 2 weeks before. He moved methodically, his tone neutral, almost bored. That was intentional. The less emotion he showed, the more damning the documents became. Phase 1 began with the side-by-side comparison of Lionel's actual signature from 2002 and the forged version submitted in March of this year. The projector showed both, enlarged on a mounted screen, every mismatched stroke made visible. He didn't editorialize. He simply read the expert assessment aloud, letting the phrase, "zero probability of authorship," hang in the air like a verdict. Phase 2 focused on the so-called witnesses. He pulled up the death certificate for Ronald Gates, deceased April 2021, followed by photographs of the dilapidated property where the second witness, Marie Lasker, supposedly resided. When Veronica opened her mouth to speak, Calvin raised a hand without looking at her and continued on to Phase 3. That phase introduced the fake trust documents. He distributed copies with the creation date, highlighted, June 28th, one day before the Venmo payment to Notary Dude. He explained the legal inconsistency of creating a trust without grantor verification or recorded consent from a surviving spouse. Then he pointed out Simone's designation as sole trustee and beneficiary. "It is unusual," he said evenly, "for a trust concerning jointly acquired property to exclude the lawful co-owner entirely." Phase 4 cut deeper. Calvin laid out the movement of funds from the insurance settlement, check dates, deposit logs, account holder signatures, and finally, the fraud report from Hamilton Southern Bank confirming forged authorization. He attached screenshots of Simone's Slack conversation, circled the phrase, kept it quiet, and moved on without flinching. Then came the final phase, the affidavit. It was signed and notarized by Deborah Hollis, the original title holder who'd transferred Lionel the property in 1998. She confirmed no corrections were ever requested or filed post-transfer. Her words were clear. No further title adjustments were discussed or authorized by me at any point. The deed as transferred remains as filed. Simone's hand jerked slightly. Marcus stared down at the table. Veronica stopped flipping pages. The paper trail had officially turned into a trap. When Calvin asked Simone to explain the Notary Dude memo, her voice cracked, and when Veronica tried to interject, he shut her down with court-verified timestamps and notarized bank logs that showed deliberate fraud, and Pastor Geraldine leaned in and said, "God don't bless no lies." The moment Calvin shifted the projector screen to show the Venmo transaction, Simone flinched. A large, clean font displayed the line, $600 Notary Dude Wine, June 29th. He looked directly at her, calm and professional. "Mrs. Monroe," he said, "please clarify the identity of this individual and his role in executing legal documents on behalf of the Monroe estate." Simone opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. That was someone Marcus found. He said we needed someone who could do a mobile notary. I didn't." Her voice faltered. "I didn't read all the paperwork. It was rushed." Veronica leaned forward, lips already forming a rebuttal. Calvin raised one finger, sharp and unwavering. "Ma'am," he said, "unless you are licensed counsel, this is not your turn to speak." She froze, nostrils flaring. He clicked to the next document. The fraud report from Hamilton Southern. Detailed logs showing funds redirected from my insurance settlement, complete with Simone's trustee authorization on file. "These documents," Calvin said, "are not mere irregularities. They constitute a coordinated attempt to reroute estate assets under a fabricated authority." Veronica's voice sliced through the silence. "It wasn't coordinated. It was corrective. Delilah has always misunderstood how these things work. She doesn't have the experience. She has the law," Pastor Geraldine said, her voice low but crystal clear. Her hand never left the Bible. She didn't raise her voice, didn't break her posture, but every syllable cut straight through the false civility in the room. God don't bless no lies. And he sure don't bless paperwork built on deceit. Marcus shifted in his chair. His eyes moved toward me for the first time in weeks, maybe months. But I didn't give him anything back. Not pity, not comfort. I didn't come to ease guilt. I came for the truth, and it had just been spoken. Let their titles shake. Mine had just been restored. Veronica stood and stormed out. Simone started crying, and Marcus, bless him, finally whispered, "I didn't know. I thought it was just a convenience transfer. while Calvin confirmed charges of attempted deed fraud would be formally reported to the DA's office. The room didn't explode. It crumbled. Veronica slammed her notebook shut like she was ending a conversation she never controlled, then stood abruptly, muttering something about being disrespected in a room full of amateurs. No one stopped her. She clutched her bag like it held her reputation, spine straight, but her shoes clicked too fast across the tile. I watched the door close behind her and felt absolutely nothing. Simone broke next. Her chin trembled first, then the tears came, soft and fast. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing her mascara, still dressed like a magazine spread, but unraveling by the minute. "We didn't mean to hurt anybody," she said through shallow breaths. It got complicated. We were trying to make things easier. For Marcus. For the future." The future. A word she used like it owed her something. Calvin didn't flinch. Intent doesn't erase illegality. You falsified a legal amendment, rerouted funds from a beneficiary account, and filed a corrective deed based on fabricated authority. That is not simplification. That is premeditated fraud. Marcus didn't argue. He lowered his voice and said, "I thought it was just a formality. Simone said it would make things cleaner for taxes. I didn't read the paperwork. I swear to God, I didn't know the witnesses were fake. I thought—" He stopped there because the rest didn't matter. He thought he could trust her. He thought I'd stay quiet. He thought wrong. Calvin gathered the remaining documents. "We'll be submitting formal complaints to the district attorney's office and state bar regarding this matter. Civil charges will follow. You'll be served with notice once filings are complete." No one asked for mercy. There was no room left for it. I stood, collected my folders, and nodded once to Pastor Geraldine, who placed a hand over mine without a word. The hearing had ended, but the reckoning had only begun. And for once, I wasn't the one carrying the shame out of the room. As we left the office, Calvin handed me a velvet pouch containing the original keys to my house. Untouched, untransferred, unclaimed, and I walked out into the autumn sun, free, with my dignity, title, and future secured. He didn't say much, just pressed the soft black pouch into my palm and gave me a look that said, "You did what had to be done." The keys were heavier than I remembered. Maybe it was the years they represented, decades of work, of bills paid on time, of memories that no document could replace. I turned them over in my hand, feeling the worn edge of the brass one Lionel had always used for the back door, still scratched near the head from where he'd dropped it on the driveway the day he came home from the hospital. That key had outlived him, outlasted lies. Outside, the wind had picked up, not sharp, not cold, just steady. The kind of wind that doesn't announce a storm, but clears out the remnants of one. Pastor Geraldine walked with me to the curb. She didn't lecture, just looked at me with that quiet strength she carries and said, "Justice doesn't always come with a trumpet. Sometimes it just walks out the front door with its shoulders back." I didn't have a comeback. I just nodded. And for the first time in months, maybe longer, I took a full breath without tasting rust in the back of my throat. The property records had been corrected, the forged documents voided, the eviction dismissed with prejudice, based on false claims and bad faith filings. Calvin would handle the civil proceedings, and the DA's office had already scheduled an initial fraud intake for the following week. Whether Simone and Veronica faced charges was no longer mine to ensure. I'd done my part, fully, legally, cleanly. Back home, I unlocked my front door like I always had. No fanfare, no audience. Just me in a house that remembered who it belonged to. Inside, I set the velvet pouch on the mantel and stood quietly, listening to the stillness I'd earned. Let them keep their stories. I had the deed, and the original keys to prove it.